other, and they're all of a sudden not as lonely as they were before.
That struck me because a little bit of a pilot, and this is almost like a replay of the pilot. It's like basically you're rebooting the show with Red Dragon, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely, and I see every chapter of this series as a chance to reboot it and reanalyze the relationship. And what was so wonderful in the structuring of this season is that we do have 2 chapters, but the themes are carried through both chapters. So we see Will and Hannibal in the first part of the season coming to the realization that they have to end the other in order to be able to be safe from the vulnerabilities of intimacy. And we put that on pause in the middle of the season, and then everything about this arc in the Red Dragon comes right back to that in a big way in the finale.
One of the things I was just telling you I love about it is seeing Richard at the very beginning. I was just thinking about those lines about what I am becoming from Red Dragon. It's like he's becoming that thing, that visualization of the King's painting.
Well, and also all of the stuff in the first 2 seasons of Hannibal saying a lot of dialogue from the Red Dragon novel.
Yeah.
That now when we got into this season, we're like, oh shit, we used all of this. Start making things up again.
There's still a few lines from Red Dragon in this episode.
Oh yeah. There was one time in particular that Hugh called me and was like, you've used this line before, and should we say that differently? And he said, yep. I'm surprised that it's only happened once. In fact, I would challenge any of the Vanderbilts to see if there are any lines repeated, because so many Thomas Harris lines showed up in scripts and then I cut them in post and then reused them again. And imagine you were like, there's that line again. I guess he cut it from the previous episode.
I'm going to ask you, what's the first thing that simultaneously scared you and made you laugh? Because there's so much of that in what you do.
Well, gosh, the first thing, I think probably the chest burster in Alien was so I was like, holy shit, and it's big old leg.
Kind of running away. But that's, and seeing this with an audience really brought that home for me. The first episode should be seen with audiences anyway, because there's so much laughter in it, and that idea of laughter and dread runs through so much of what you do.
Well, I think that, I guess it's not taking life too seriously, even though the message of the show is like, respect life and embrace life, engage in life, and also don't take it too seriously, because there's a lot of very dark humor in this entire series. I see the series as a very light comedy.
Which really is what Red Dragon is, more so I think than the subsequent books. I mean, because you kind of go, you can't believe it. And when the first time you see the phrase, I don't know, for a lot of you guys who came to this late, the first time you see the phrase Hannibal LACMA, you have to laugh.
Right. It rhymes.
And Freddie Lounds is a great character. I mean, the book is full of great characters. And one of the things I thought that you respond to in Harris, and even in Star Trek, is your shows are dense with populations. I mean, unlike other TV shows, you just like 4 people who sound exactly the same. Your shows have 10 or 12 people, and all of them have different personalities. Where does that come from for you, that idea of building these cities?
Well, I think it's probably going back to mythological storytelling. There's always the hero, but the hero is surrounded with all of these people who teach them lessons. And I think for Will Brandt, everybody in this world teaches him some sort of lesson or creates some sort of warning. And we've tried to evolve people's relationships within the show as we've gotten into further seasons. So the relationship between Will and Alana, which was very much of a caretaker relationship in the first season, and this season we kind of wanted to make them reflect the history of what they've been through together, and also marvel at how far they've come since that first season.
Well, between Alana and Freddie, you take characters who were males and made them women. And that's one of the things that really changes the scope of this, because to me, and you really seized on this, Hannibal's a character that embodies both the male and the female. I mean, both sides of the spectrum.
Well, there was a lot of, when I first saw Silence of the Lambs,
See the 4 Manhunters?
Yeah, I saw Manhunter, but Brian Cox's interpretation is so different than Anthony Hopkins, and both of them I love. And Brian Cox is so distinctly male and aggressive and manipulative, whereas Anthony Hopkins has a different type of manipulation. He's much more of a dandy and a beat in a way, where he was sexually ambiguous in Silence of the Lambs. It was like, is he into her, or does he just like her shoes? I think there's an innate quality of any man who appreciates the finer things. There is an embracing of an aesthetic which could be arguably a feminine side.
Because I was telling you before we came out here that this could be sort of Douglas Sirk's serial killer drama. Because
high grades.
But you know what I mean? There's that sort of thing where Sirk, the melodrama was so heightened that it became comic. In this 180s, the violence is so heightened that it's almost comic in that way.
Well, I watch The Walking Dead religiously, and I always see the zombie violence. When the zombie's head explodes, I think that's comic relief. There's so much tension, and in our show, it's nice to see it with an audience that gets the humor and also allows themselves to laugh because it's ridiculous. It's so pretentious. And the dialogue is so over the top. Nobody talks like that. It's fun for us on the show, and we tackle on the writers' room some of the ridiculous things that come out of it. And we ask the actors to say. There's one line from Hannibal Rising, it's one of the first few lines about Thomas Harris, as the narrator saying, "Come with us and see how the beast, within him, can break the teeth or something about teats in the line." And so we gave it to Gillian Anderson in the 6th episode of this season, knowing full well that it was, like, I was just curious, like, how is she going to do with this line? It was so silly. And she just bammed across the room. She knew exactly what to do with the line.
The reason I quote that teacup is broken lines, it could be from a Britney Spears song. Just these two guys saying it to each other, it really is, it's the end of a romance.
Yeah. And, it's also quantum physics, and which in the books, Hannibal was obsessed with the brief history of time.
Physics is a mathematical reason for everything, and actually he conflates math and religion.
Yes, because behavior is mathematical, like what happens in our brains is mathematical, life is mathematical, life spirals, like there is it's hard not to realize how much math plays out in human behavior.
One of the things that was so much fun about this, just reading about this kind of crazy orotund dialogue that runs through the books, is Hannibal has a affinity for lists.
Right.
And just going over things, and you just enumerate that so beautifully over the run of the series.
Well, there's great fun in the book where Hannibal will go to his mind palace, and then he'll recall some information, and the book, Thomas Harris will say, and he missed that because he just walked out of the mind palace where he was reading that file. And it's so goofy on one level, but it is done with sobriety. So you're not playing the comedy of it, you're hoping that the audience gets the comedy.
So I was wondering what that was like when you shot the pilot, and because it's almost like everything you've done has led you to this. And I wondered at what point you decided you would like, because I know there was a conversation on the plane that sort of brought that stuff into motion, but that must have been going around your head even before that idea of trying to actually find a way to bring that humor, because the movies played a little seriously. I mean, Red Dragon especially took it way too serious.
Yeah, Red Dragon is a funny film in many ways.
Often not intentional.
And Manhunter is actually a different kind of fun because it's that 80s aggressive, cinematically aggressive.
Big shoulder pads, everybody in the subbase with FBI is wearing $3,000 suits.
Yes, and the shorts.
I am okay.
Yes. And we tried to figure out a way to film in Florida for the
gonna do that?
We tried to because we wanted to see you dancing in those shorts. Sorry, he had us all tucked in with his parka.
Well, anyway, but one of the things that make this so great to see here in this theater, and you don't really get a sense of it so much, but how gorgeous the sound design is.
The sound design is immaculate. David Slade, who directed our pilot, he mixes.
We did Hard Candy.
Pardon?
We did Hard Candy.
Yes, an amazing movie. Definitely Hard Candy is David Slade's first, and it's fantastic.
He made Ellen Page a movie star.
Exactly, yes. And so he has such a great ear and a great mind for sound design.
Hard Candy can almost be like a rehearsal for this in a way.
Well, it is, but it's actually a very bright film. For as dark as the subject matter is, but it's also a very funny film. I mean,
it's funny too, but also...
Unless you're a child molester, then...
But that idea of power shifting and who the person might be, the victim becoming flipping the coin, all these things, I can see why you want to bring him on board, having seen Hard Candy.
Yes, and also we had, our first meeting was 4 hours long. He knew the books inside and out, had such a passion for the books. And usually in television you have a director who comes and does the pilot and then you never see them again. They collect a check for every episode. David came back, he directed additional episodes. He is in every sound mix for this show, and he works hand in glove with Brian Reitzel, whose score is very much sound design. They're, watching it, we bury all of the Foley, we just like turn it way down, and we just let Brian Reitzel take over.
Because one of the things that really strikes me about your work too is that, unlike many TV creators, you're really director friendly. There's David, there's Barry Sonnenfeld. You've had a number of shows where the director's sensibility has been key. Talk about finding these guys Neil Marshall. Talk about finding these guys whose sensibilities sync with yours. Because again, I think that's one of the things that makes these shows so specific and unique.
Well, it really, I am a big fan of design and filmic language. So working with a director who actually appreciates that a writer understands what their job is and also doesn't try to micromanage. I think there's also a lot of writers in the industry who, having a pilot, will say like, okay, as a writer's medium television, so I'm going to micromanage the director, and you just never get good work from anybody if you micromanage them, and it's really about finding people who have the same likes and then just saying, make it better, and how can I support you? With both Barry and David, they were amongst the easiest pilot experiences that I've had because I didn't have to do as much because I had a directing partner who took over. Series is a different thing, that it's all coming down to, okay, what is the language they've created? And with David on Hannibal, we had several scripts written before we started shooting, and we did the pilot, and David knocked it out of the park, and I was like, none of these scripts are up to David's par. So we had to rewrite all of these, we had to rewrite these stories, we had to toss out these scripts because David made such a beautiful piece of art from the script that he's raised the bar and we need to follow him. So that first season was terrifying because we threw out all the scripts after seeing what David did and restarted, and it was a scramble, but I'm glad that we did it. We drove a little bit crazy, but...
Well, if you want to, you have a few people in the audience, but you have Steve and Nick who look at it, so if you want to introduce people.
We've got a lot of great co-writers and we've got all people who love Thomas Harris as much as I do, and you've all fetishized him and fetishized the language and given prose and turned it into dialogue that some of the actors are just shaking their heads at it. It's like, well, if you keep making it work, we're going to keep giving you ridiculous stuff.
Well, talk about sitting down with a man for the first time, that first conversation.
The first time I met Mads in the lobby of the Chateau Marmont, and
Hannibal quite vivid in real life.
So typically, Hollywood in terms of one of those meetings, but he walked up and he just looked like a rock star and had a rock star presence. I was like, oh, it's the European George Clooney. And Maz sat down and he's like, well, I don't want to play him like anybody else. I was like, well, no, clearly. And he's like, I'm seeing this character as Lucifer. He is a fallen angel. And I thought, like, oh, that is so cool. Let's have that be a parallel reality where both things are true. Like so when we look at stories and we see how Hannibal gets to places inexplicably, he either turned to smoke and went under the door, or he went into a tunnel or something. So we wanted to make sure that it was both real and also had the capacity to be fantastical at the same time.
Okay, that's actually something that you do that the books don't. I mean, the books are really super precise and they have a logic. And at a certain point, this is just Grand Guignol. I mean, it truly is. That's why I said Douglas Sirk, because you kind of look at going, why am I watching this all stuff and laughing at it? Because it's that idea of, okay, you know, in the musical, just before we break in the song, everything's italicized. Every scene in every episode is like that.
Yeah.
After a while, because I watched everything getting ready for this, and I wanted to cry. I was so exhausted because it takes so much out of you to watch it. What's the process of creating that tension?
It takes many drafts, and the writers and I, we work very tirelessly. We will break an episode, and then we'll understand it, and we'll see the first draft, and go like, okay, that's not it. Let's start restructuring and turning it inside out, and then we'll do another episode.
Did that happen a little bit with The Great Red Dragon? Did you ever rework that a couple of times as well?
That stayed actually pretty close to the structure of when we broke it. It was just a matter of them finding the layers of the tiramisu to keep going with the different characters and bringing Frederick Chilton back. He's got a fantastic arc in the rest of the season. And pardon? The tent poles are all there from the book, but or I should say the main poles are there, and the people dancing around them may not necessarily be the characters dancing around them.
Because obviously you changed the idea of creating this incredible backstory for these guys. I mean, you just went really far beyond what's in the books. Because again, it's just, the nightmare is that basically when they sit down for that first time with a dragon, they're the mirror image of each other.
Right.
Except one is admitted what he is and the other is not. And going back to the pilot, or for me, the first episode of the second season, which starts with a climax and then goes backwards. Talk about the writing of that. That must have been a tough one to do.
That one we knew going in that, I knew that I wanted to end up with a big fight with Lawrence and Maz, because Maz had a fight sequence in the first season, and then Lawrence came and tapped me on the shoulder and was like, I know how that fight. So it was like, okay, we've got to get these two guys in brawl, and it was basically my impatience. I didn't want to wait until episode 13. Start with it, it's going to be fun. And so it was selfish impatience. That structure, and just wanting to see it sooner than later.
But that really too fit in so many things, because again, that idea of comedy and dread. I mean, that's a David Cronenberg thing. It's The Fly.
Yeah. Well, so there's a lot of difference in the show. There's even lines that are lifted from Dead Ringers about separation being a terrible thing, and Cronenberg is a huge influence on this show. The body dysmorphia, murders, and death tableaus of the first two seasons were all Cronenberg inspired, and I love his work. The Brood is one of my favorites of his, and I love that it was about the psychological manifestation of anger coming out to the world.
Kind of conspicuous all the time. But I mean, that idea too, with Cronenberg, with the body as being in this sort of constant state of vulnerability and decay, but really vulnerability.
And I think that's Will's state of mind. It's like the meat was left out on the counter encounter in the first episode, and it's been slowly rotting.
You think you said that I feel a little bit of Polanski in the show too.
Oh yeah, and the mind trips. There's a lot of repulsion in this series, and what Polanski did so well and beautifully was illustrate the paranoia itself. Like, I'm paranoid about myself, right? Is my perception of reality an accurate one, or is it slowly slipping away from me? And I'm paranoid about everybody around me. Can I trust Dr. Saperstein? And there's a lot of paranoia in that. And I think Will is very paranoid about his own identity and terrified that Hannibal was right. And we'll discover by the end of this season whether or not Hannibal was right.
But also, I think, was the Polanski, the idea of delusion becoming reality.
Yes, and for Will and our purposes of tackling this story in the third season, so much of it was playing with reality. Like, how much of this is actually happening? How much of it is in Will's head? What is the nature of trauma when he's gone through such a horrible experience where he was courting the devil and then the devil got at him and he lost someone that he loved and all of his relationships have then been devastated. So he is very much in a state of questioning what is real for him and what is not real. Is Hannibal right? Is that real?
But in the Creepers Romance, you made Will a much more vulnerable figure than he is in the book.
Yeah, well, there was little hints of his vulnerability that I kind of hit on when early descriptions where Jack Crawford was talking about how he wouldn't make eye contact and certain patterns of behavior where he would dip into the cadence of another person's speech because he couldn't hold on to his own identity when he was with somebody who was so sensitive to others. So that felt like it was indicative of certain mental illnesses, and so it felt like, well, there's something wrong with Wilbur.
There's a bit of arrogance masking that in that character in the book, and you sort of peel that arrogance away from him. He's a really kind of a tuning fork almost. He sort of takes on the frequency wherever is in the room.
Yes, and that would be one of the things that was interesting in the first episode. He would use his glasses as a human shield, and he would stare at the rim so he didn't actually have to make eye contact. And that was something that I related to because if I'm looking at somebody directly in the eye and having a conversation with them, I get lost because eyes are so windows to the soul, and it just goes, oh, it's hard to, yes. Now I can relax it. So I basically identified with Will in many ways in his social limitations, and then became aware of how I conquered certain things as my own self. But there's a lot of passages of Will talking about why he doesn't make eye contact that were just my experiences that I felt very connected to Will, and that first season in particular, I became very antisocial, and I was in his shoes too much. So
basically the same thing happened to you that happened to Will Graham.
Oh yeah, the last 3 years were a dark time for the rebellion. It's very heavy. It's very heavy stuff.
It is, and that's why I'm asking about that idea of, for me, just the sheer exhaustion level of keeping that sort of constancy of sort of dread and comedy that sort of links Polanski and Cronenberg. It's actually very much not an American thing. It's Hitchcock.
Right.
You think of so many other people that do it. It's really not an American thing so much.
No, and there wasn't any kind, I guess with this show, I didn't have necessarily an agenda for how I wanted to tell the story. I just had to start telling it. And in the writer's room, we will kick around ideas, and sometimes I can be very frustrating because I'll just know it's not right, but I can't articulate beyond that. But the writers have always been fantastic in catching up. So when I put up an orange cone, everybody steers around it, and we collectively come up with better ideas.
It feels very European to me, that sort of way of being dismissive of kind of American attitudes, and an American kind of fear of the world, and an American need for orderliness.
were very languid, and
Yeah, it's a niche killer. I think so.
that was very much like, we know it's a niche show. We did it. So here's us admitting to it. So that was very intentional in kind of our admission to the audience that thank you for also being niche.
Since we're talking about the dialogue here, there are also lots of passages of no dialogue. I mean,
This episode in particular,
yes,
there's a lot of naked Richard Armitage.
we're going to get somebody in Florida one way or another.
Doesn't have to be cold for Richard to take off his clothes. Or warm.
Cold, I admire bravery.
Yes. Oh, and he did that. It was funny. There was the scene where he's all bloody and the moonlight, and it was a crazy Toronto winter. So
Was it just last year?
Because there was this like February.
Because I saw that you come to see fish and it was freezing. Yeah.
It's like your nose hairs become needles. It's crazy. And so Richard was out there, and he comes to the show, and we're like, well, we got to cover you in black blood, and you have to stand naked. And so the brother's like, okay, and then we're like, okay, Hugh, we need to repeat that shot for a further episode of your set. He's like, you can map my face onto a stand.
We'll talk about Hugh. Talk about your first meeting with him.
Well, Hugh, we went and saw Venus and Verb, and Hugh is in that with Nina Arianda, who plays his wife in the Red Dragon arc. And so he was very cautious, because it was myself, Martha De Laurentiis, and Sarah Colleton, who was a producer on the pilot. And it was the three of us, and he came sort of sheepishly up and sat at the table, and I basically said, this is what we want to do with the show, and I walked him through many seasons, and he was shocked that we knew so much, that it's like, this is what the show is going to be, and we kind of stayed true to that, because he was warned that his experiences, nobody knows what they're doing after a pilot, and to be terrified. And then we just laid it all out, and he was like, okay, you seem to know what you're doing, and he actually, Max and Hugh, more than any other show that I've experienced, those two leads came up with as many ideas as the writers. They would, because they knew the characters, so they would come and pitch stuff to us. And there's a lot of stuff throughout the season that is Maz and Hughes' pitches for the characters, and it'd be like, oh yeah, because we're telling the story and we're getting into the meat and potatoes and some of the surreality. And a lot of the emotional things are pitches from Maz and Hugh, and it was a great collaboration.
One of the things we talked about a little bit before we came on, we see Hannibal, we also saw in Shining Bride, which daisies. You like dressing your guys up, and there's a guy who likes clothes. I started watching to see, what's Hannibal like been wearing this way?
Well, a lot of the suits we made, and so that was Chris Hardman.
I told you again, I'm a size 40, so Matt, tonight you told me the same size. See? So, we'll be wrong with quite don't you?
We were afraid of those 3D suits, and it's so frustrating. Both Steve Lightfoot, my writing partner on Hannibal, and I would go to the wardrobe and be holding things up and trying to squeeze into it. So, I love an aesthete, and I love Shy McBride, who is an aesthete off camera, and when we were doing Pushing Daisies, we're like, we have this idea of him being a dandy, and he's like, oh, I'm going to do that. This is who you're going to make my suits. This is who you're going to make my shoes. This is who you're going to...
We can shoot, yeah, the Shy says got to make shoes for me. He said, here's my guy, I want push shoes. Yes.
Everything is bespoke with Shy McBride.
Yeah.
And so it had to be, because he is... the show has to be as meticulously designed as the character is. And so his taste in clothing, his taste in art, all of that was an exciting part of the mythology that we haven't really got to explore in the previous adaptations, because he's usually in that first show.
I mean, the thing that's interesting about this too is that for so many of your a sort of a secondary character, like I said, for whom his life is art. And in this Chinese character in Pushing Daisies, it's man's here. The idea is somebody who basically looks at the world as a place to sort of make into art, and the visual scheme that each of the shows kind of reflect that sensibility of these characters. I like that kind of visual stylization is so specific to you, that these people, we see their worldview through the way the shows look.
That's, we're in a visual medium, and so I think that glamour also goes back to old Hollywood storytelling. And I'm a big Cary Grant fan, and he's always impeccably dressed, except when he's on an island.
As are you.
I try.
Nice shoe color, by the way.
Got bloody shoes. So I think it's fun to stop a show with the things that you love, and Pushing Daisies was filled with things that I love, and Hannibal the same, because you're going to be working tirelessly on something, and you want to make sure that you have some fun to turn to around the corner, like little joys. I love meetings with the wardrobe people, the production designer. I love those meetings because I'm very much a closet production designer, and I'm a closet costume designer as well. I love all of that stuff.
Because, one thing I get asked is the last thing. Has Jose undressed come to your house and cooked for you?
No, but he did offer to take me to the offal markets of Spain, and I don't eat, not yet, and I'm looking forward to it, and this is just our first collaboration with Jose. He was such a fantastic partner on the show, and of course I loved, in Spain, and knew him from his own show and then from Top Chef. And my first meeting with him was hilarious because he just got the James Beard Award, and they were having a party at the Bazaar, and I asked my agent if he could make an introduction because I wanted him to be the culinary consultant at Hannibal. And so they introduced me, and the agent said, he's working on Hannibal. He's like, oh, I've got to be your food consultant. Before I could even ask him, and then he was talking about all the crazy things that you do with food, that you could do with people. And he was like, oh, you have to make stuffed sheep's vagina, but of course it wouldn't be a sheep. Those are the things that are crazy. You never got around to stuffed sheep vagina.
This leads me to my last question. We were just saving stuffed sheep vagina for some other iteration. For those of us who have hopes for a future for Hannibal, what can we?
Well, I think we have to.
What is the Kickstarter again?
I think we have to watch the rest of the season, and because things play out very interestingly and unexpectedly, and then start the conversation anew because things change dramatically at the end of the season, and the fourth season kind of catapults, or the fourth season was intended to catapult off of the abrupt changes at the end of this season. So it's hard to talk about future without the audience having seen it, but Mads and you are willing to come back whenever and do these characters again. They both had a great time, and like I said, we had a wonderful collaboration where they would be pitching myself or Steve Lightfoot things, and we would just keep folding them into the show, so they felt like they had a home, and that they were respected as creative storytellers, which I want everybody who works with me to feel like they're respected as storytellers, and that would be the fun.
Well, let's thank Brian for